the first thing I want to say is that your work matters. No matter what you're doing, God cares about it. The psalmist even says to God, he says, establish the work of our hands. So whatever you're doing, God cares. I'm going to focus in on a unique challenge, and some of you have already brought this up today in your questions and your conversations, so hopefully this will be something that intrigues you and something we can all learn from. I love talking about this topic, and this is the first time in history that this has become such a hot topic. And before I dive in, I first want to ask a few questions to the audience, so you can just raise your hand if this applies to you. How many of you wake up in the morning and you go into work and you feel empowered, you feel heard, and you feel like you deeply understand the why of what you're doing there? Anyone? Okay. How many of you go into work and most of the time you feel misunderstood, disrespected, sidelined? Anyone? All right. How many of you have been at your job for more than 3 years? Okay. Those of you who have been, how many of you are still there because you've had a promotion in the last 6 months? Okay. How many of you stayed at that job because you have increased workplace flexibility? Okay. So some of the things you value have changed. How many of you go into work and within the first moments you want everybody to know that you are a millennial? Like you literally walk in and you're like, hey, I'm a millennial. Anyone? How many of you walk in and actually being known as a millennial is the last thing you want people to think of or look at you through that lens? Okay? I speak all over to companies and organizations about this topic. The number one diversity issue right now in North America is age. And often when millennials come to, sometimes I do seminars on the generations in the workforce, right? And they walk in and they're like, oh great, she's gonna tell me I'm narcissistic, lazy, and entitled, just like that Time magazine article, and I'm tired of hearing it. Now when they leave, they tell me they feel something different, and they've actually learned a few things, so hopefully you will today. But millennials are literally becoming afraid to say, I'm a millennial. I just met with one a couple weeks ago who she's doing a presentation. She wants to talk about her experience as a millennial. She's a nurse, and she's afraid to act. She's like, if I lead with the fact that I'm a millennial, no one's going to listen to me. This is a huge, huge problem. I also want you to know before I jump in that I'm pro-millennial. Okay? I think that's important to establish at the beginning. And the reason I got into even doing this is because I used to teach leadership development at a college. And one day in class, well, I did this every year, but one day kind of stood out amongst all the rest. I said, what is the best form of leadership? I gave them 3 choices: authoritative, democratic, or laissez-faire. And everybody's hand went up when I asked about laissez-faire. Right? That's like you do you, right? Now, you say that to a boomer and they're like, laissez-faire, that's disaster. Don't ever do that. And what I started to think about was, wow, that response never would have happened 10 years ago, and it wouldn't have even happened 5 years ago. Like something is uniquely shifting in our culture, in our society, in the way we think about and do leadership. So we've gone from this very hierarchical, structured leadership, top-down, tell me what to do, to now, with my research, so I did a qualitative study, so I interviewed a ton of millennials, and what constantly came up to the surface was leadership is simply a role that you hold, and it can easily be passed on to someone else. It's more of a shared concept, or it depends on who's passionate about the topic at hand. And they're very clear, without hesitation, that the leader does not have any more value than they do. Now, You tell that to a boomer and they're like, what do you mean? I've worked hard to get to where I am. I deserve respect, and I want to be treated as such. And in some ways, rightfully so. But millennials are like, no, we've seen too many of you fall. We want you to know that you're on the same plane as we are. So right there, from the very beginning, the way we've been taught to lead in the workplace is very different than what millennials are looking for. So another thing, we all know today that if a company is going to survive, it has to be innovative. When you ask people what's one of the #1 qualities of an innovative team, they'll say it needs to be diverse. Okay? Even the word diversity means something different to a boomer than it does to someone who's a part of Gen Z. Right? Gen Z and most millennials, we don't see color, okay? But to a boomer, it's very much ethnicity, right? And I've got to have this type of person and this type of person. Now it means it's diversity of thought. It's very different. David Livermore recently did a study, and what he found was that teams that are brought together to do innovation, actually the most innovative teams are homogeneous teams, which means that people are basically the same. He said, unless there's one factor. The factor that changes that is if the leader of the team is culturally intelligent. So you guys are young marketplace leaders. This is the first time in history that 5 generations, which pretty much equals out to 5 different cultures, are sitting around the same conference table, are working together in the same operating room, but they see the world and the way we work and the way we think about work very, very differently. And so if you, as a young leader, can understand the different cultures that are around you and learn to navigate them and learn what's important to them, you know, if you go over to, if you're a native of New York, the Bronx, say, and you go over to Korea, hopefully you don't just step in and start telling them how to do things your way, right? What do? You observe how they behave. You start to learn the language. You watch how they use their body. What are their nonverbals, right? You study the other culture. That's the same thing that needs to start happening in the workplace if we're going to start to bridge these gaps and close them, because the tension is palpable. I mean, you guys know, sometimes I can walk into a room and all I have to do is say, millennial, and people turn red in the neck. Or if I'm in a room full of millennials, I go, yeah, those boomers, they don't get it. And they're like, yes, amen, right? And that's the first thing we think about when we see somebody who has a little bit of gray hair, or we see somebody who looks like they're just fresh out of college. We immediately put them in their generation. We make all kinds of stereotypes and assumptions. And then we can't get past this tension that we feel when we're working with each other. And we don't understand that it's because we come from very different cultures. And this has changed everything. So what is this generational shift? What's actually occurring? The traditionalists, they built many of the organizations and companies that exist today. They created them. The boomers came in, they set the values and the beliefs of these companies. Gen X arrived. Gen Xers, I'm a Gen Xer. There are about 20 million fewer Gen Xers than there are boomers or millennials. Okay, we're a small generation, but we are mighty. Right, William? Where's William? Who just discovered he was a Gen Xer. So we came in, we helped shape a lot of the systems that you'll find in organizations today. We made a little bit of movement in terms of workplace flexibility, but again, we were small, so we didn't have the same kind of impact. So what you'll find is overall, Gen Xers then join the status quo. And so these organizations that were started by traditionalists, and many of you probably work for them, some of you probably don't. Some of you have maybe already transitioned to a more innovative company or what you feel is more innovative. right? But the status quo has existed for over 50 years. Then what happened? That's not a rhetorical question. What happened? Say it. Millennials. Millennials arrived on the scene and people are going, what are you talking about? You are speaking a different language. You're asking for things that you don't deserve. Because the world I came up in, if I'm a traditionalist, looked very different than the one the millennials came up in. And so they're hearing things like Zipcar found that 65% of millennials will be more upset if they lose their phone or their computer than if they lose their car. You say that to a boomer, a car meant ultimate freedom to a boomer. They can tell you when they bought it, the exact color, the make and the model. Am I right, boomers who are over here? Yes. A car meant everything. Now Gen Zers, they're not even getting their driver's license anymore. They don't care. Okay? Most common living situation for a millennial, what is it? Say it. Nope, it's not renting. For those of you in the city, that makes a lot of sense, but that's actually not the most common. Living with your parents. Again, you tell that to a baby boomer, when they left home, the door closed behind them. They were not welcome back. In fact, I don't think they wanted to go back. Okay? Millennials are moving back in. Gallup found that millennial turnover is costing the U.S. economy over $30 billion every year. So when you leave your job every 3 to 5 years, which is the average, you're costing your company sometimes between $10,000 and $50,000 to replace you. That's a whole new cost that when baby boomers were going through that, right? Loyalty is one of their biggest work values, right? And now you're telling me I have to spend an extra $3 million because my millennial employees just don't want to stay? Do you see how it's causing a mess, right? A lot of misunderstanding. Now, you throw the fifth generation in there, Gen Z, they just arrived on the workforce scene about 1.5 years ago. They're even more different than millennials. Okay, this has now become an extension of their brain. You talk to Gen X parents who are raising Gen Zers, when you take this cell phone away from a kid today, they feel this deep angst that none of us can relate to. And the reason they do is because this is how they connect with the world. So you're not just taking away a toy, you're literally cutting off their arm. So it has a huge impact on them. 72% of Gen Z, they want to create their own major in college. You tell that to a boomer or Gen Xer, I'm like, do you know how many classes I had to take that I could have cared less about, but I had to do it. I had to go through the red tape, right? Gen Zers are like, well, I'll just watch it on YouTube. I don't need to go to college. I can learn all I need to know online. 75% of Gen Zers are more concerned about getting a job than finding a spouse. Now, to millennials, that might not sound very weird. But to a boomer, when you're 18, you're getting married. You're already thinking about that stage of life. So to graduate from high school and college and not be even concerned about who you're going to marry, total shift. Totally different culture. So what is a generation? What am I even talking about? Who knows? Again, not a rhetorical question. What is it? Okay, a culture. What else? Excellent. Yes, he said a people group formed between two dates. So it's typically by birth years that we define generations. And then it's a culture, right? It's based on shared experiences that we've had. Things that have helped frame the way that we look at the world, the way we look at work, and the way we look at each other. Typically, generations were defined by about 20 years of births. Over time, that is becoming condensed greatly. Now they're saying generations are going to turn over about every 8 years. I 100% agree with this, and here's why. When I go around and I talk to people, I'll say to the room, who in here is a millennial? Raise their hand. Usually, at this point, there's about 30% in the room that will raise their hand. They're millennials. And the first thing out of their mouth, though, is, I'm a millennial, but I'm not really a millennial. I'll say, okay, tell me about that. Who in here has heard about a zennial? Okay? A zennial, which is X and then ennial, is an older millennial. They've grown up with an analog childhood, a digital adulthood. Their favorite video game was the Oregon Trail. Anyone tracking with me? Right? And they're the ones who are going, quit labeling me like this, because that's not me. Right? So the older millennials tend to fall into that. Younger millennials, they're probably those who are 30 and under, roughly. They typically don't have families yet, right? So they have a different mindset. And what they're saying now is in the future, and who knows, this could be 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, things are changing fast, but they're saying technology is going to change so fast that generations will actually turn over every year, which I can't quite get my brain around. But if you think about how fast things are changing, that's how much our world is going to change and give each generation a different perspective, and it will happen annually. So when we think about significant events, things that have taken place that have shaped the generations, this is important as you enter the workplace and you're trying to navigate, you're a millennial in a boomer world. And remember, Gen Xers are there too, and they matter. I have to put that plug in, right? Right now, Gen Xers feel like they've got to hold the boomers and the millennials together, because even though the boomers raised the millennials, they can't seem to get along in the workplace. All right? So traditionalists growing up, they grew up during the war, right? So hierarchical leadership made a ton of sense with the way our culture was at that time. And one thing we have to get over too, it's not about good or bad or right or wrong. This is the way the world was. And so people made choices and had aspirations based on the way our culture was being shaped. Boomers came around, civil rights, Vietnam, hippies. Gen X, one of the most formative events for a Gen Xer, sitting in elementary school watching the first space shuttle that carried a teacher exploded in front of our face. All of us saw it, and they pumped that up. And you know, when you're in elementary school, who are the most important people in your life? Your parents and your teacher, right? And you watched a teacher die. That shapes the way we thought about technology. That shapes the way we think about the world. For millennials, obviously 9/11 made all the difference. Food. Something as simple as food. For traditionalists, it was all about Sunday night, you gather around the table, every generation, we eat together. Boomers, yes, they ate this. Anyone know what this is? TV dinner, right? And boomers got excited about this, and they couldn't wait to open up that aluminum foil and see what their dessert was. Am I right? Gen X, we grew up on carryout. I can't tell you how many chicken McNuggets I ate as a child. Millennials, all about home-delivered, fresh, organic food, which quite honestly, I don't mind myself. Technology. When you look at a traditionalist, understand that many of them did not even have indoor plumbing. So when you think about how far they've come, the fact that they're even using one of these is pretty remarkable. And so for those of you who, I've talked to many nurses, and they're like, oh my gosh, so maybe I shouldn't get so impatient with them when they don't pick up on technology as quickly as I do. It's like this light bulb goes out just because they've seen a picture of an outhouse. But this is real. My grandparents had an outhouse when we used to go visit them. For boomers, the big technological advance was the television. In the early 1950s, only 4 million houses had TVs. By 1960, over 80 million houses had TVs. So the TV kind of took over. So then, by the time Gen X was growing up, everybody had a TV. That was normal. So Gen Xers are also known as the latchkey kids. So they would come home from school. Many more women were in the workforce at this point. And they would let themselves in, which now, in certain places and at certain ages, is illegal. Okay, so that's how much the world has changed from when, and I'm not that much older than you. I know you guys think 40 is like ancient, okay? But really, that's not that much time, okay? So Gen Xers would come home. By the time they were 20, they had watched over 23,000 hours of television. And does anyone know what station they listened to the most, or they watched the most? Melissa, you know. Yes, thank you. I'm like, I know there's another Gen Xer in here. Thank you. MTV, right? Now MTV, it's not even about music videos. So for Gen X, though, the big technological advance was the microwave. I literally remember, again, I'm not that much older than you. I literally remember my mom saying, we will never get a microwave because we will all die. And she was dead serious, okay? That's how scary that was, to bring it into the average household. For millennials, the cell phones changed everything. For all of us, it's changed everything, right? Language. For boomers, we had the hippies. They said groovy a lot. Gen Xers. Dude, that's awesome. When I say that now, people look at me and go, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh, maybe I am getting old, right? Millennials. What does this mean? YOLO. Right, you only live once. I always tell boomers it's okay. Millennials love acronyms. All you have to do is Google them. You will find out what they mean, right? So for Gen Z, though, what's the hot word for the generation coming after you? Throw some out. Woke, okay? Lit. You think that's more Gen Z than millennial? Yes. Oh, okay. I will make mental note of that. Thank you. This is how I learn things. This is great. Actually, 2015, year of the word, tears of joy emoji. Okay. What's happening in the workforce is Gen Xers and boomers are sending out recruitment emails. They're getting responses that are signed with kissy face emojis. So boomers and Gen Xers are going, oh my gosh, what do I do? I mean, they're like paralyzed. This is so unprofessional. How could you possibly think to do that? But to a Gen Z, this is how I communicate. I talked to my niece a few weeks ago. She's headed off to college, Ohio State. I'm a Hoosier, but I'm still a Big Ten girl, so you can cheer for Ohio State. But she said off there, and she said, Aunt Katherine, I am going to love my roommate. I said, really? I said, have you met her? She's like, no. I said, well, how do you know? She said, because we have the same texting language. Well, she didn't even say texting language. That's my translation. She's like, we text the same. Right? But it's not about talking, communicating verbally, which to a boomer, that's everything. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So the very way we communicate, it's a whole different language. And see, I can forget about that Gen Zer because they put that kissy face emoji in my email and I can say, forget you. Or I can talk to them and try to figure out what they meant by that and what they were trying to communicate, right? But each company, each organization, you have to decide what you're willing to work with and what you're not willing to work with. So communication. These are a few more practical things, ways to navigate, because you guys are influencers in your space. So when you're thinking about engaging with these other cultures that are around you, here are a few tips. Boomers. When boomers entered the workplace, there were 80 million of them. They worked incredibly hard to get to the top of the ladder. And there was a certain way that they had to do it. And if they didn't do it that way, they were overlooked because there were plenty of other people who were waiting to take their space. So they tend to know how to do the office politics, and they're good at them. And one of the things they do when they communicate, and maybe you'll find this to be true in your experience, is they'll often start with the positive and they kind of ease into the negative, right? Because it's much better to start with the positive. And actually, they translated that to their children, right? Millennials, you typically have boomer parents. So millennials typically like to hear the positive first, and then you kind of ease into the negative, right? Body language. It was a very political scene. So boomers had to get smart about reading their environment, understanding the context. Is this a safe meeting that I'm in, or is this a meeting I need to keep my mouth shut in? What kind of mood is the boss in today? How are their arms crossed? Because you ask a boomer, if my arms are crossed like this, or my arms are crossed like this, that means two totally different things. And what they're realizing is millennials don't really pick up on those cues, because millennials have spent a lot more time behind this than they have studying the other humans around them. Because when a boomer rode the train, all they could do was watch the other people around them, right? Or strike up conversation. What do we all do now? We're on our phones. Okay, so body language is incredibly important. So when you walk out of a meeting and a boomer's going, "Are you sure you're okay?" And you're like, "What do you mean? I just told you I was okay." They're not listening to your words. They're actually seeing the full picture of what you're conveying through your body. Another simple thing, when you're working with a boomer, whether you're their supervisor, you're under them, you're their peer, listen to what they have to say. They've been around for a long time. They have a lot of wisdom. Allow them to share that with you. That will go miles and miles and miles. Gen X, we're like, and I actually am a middle child, but Gen X is the middle child, so I feel this on several levels. We have to understand why. That is a key ingredient to motivating a Gen Xer. Gen Xers are not like boomers. They don't like to just talk about all the good and then give me the bad. No, it's like, just shoot it to me straight. Melissa, am I right? Just tell me what you're thinking. Don't go off over here. Don't go off. Just tell me. Be direct with a Gen Xer. Don't micromanage a Gen Xer. Here's why. Gen Xers were latchkey kids, right? They came home, they were either watching TV or they were getting the chores done right before mom and dad came home, but they are very independent, they're very adaptable and flexible. They will figure things out on their own. So when you try to micromanage them or give them all the details, they're like, whew, you're killing my very spirit, right? So give them space. Gen Xers are an excellent resource for a millennial trying to navigate the boomer world. Don't overlook them. Millennials. So these are the things I tell the boomers and the Gen Xers about millennials. So you guys feel free to let me know if I'm off, okay? Because this is helpful. So millennials, they want to grow. If I don't feel like I'm growing, I'm moving on. And one of the biggest mistakes millennials can make, and I hear this over and over and over again, is because you guys have knowledge at your fingertips and you can find the answer to anything, you think you've mastered certain things very quickly. And I understand that. I understand even why you would think that. But the reality is, even if we have a lot of knowledge, we might not have the experience to match it. And sometimes that knowledge has to be tweaked and used in different ways for the same situation. So don't assume that if you're not promoted out of your current position in a year, sorry, the Wi-Fi thing just popped up, that you're going to get bored. Find new ways to apply what you're already learning and seek out those who have been there longer than you and expand the breadth of your knowledge as well as the depth. But don't just jump to the next thing because you think you have it mastered. Okay. Millennials are incredible team players. You guys grew up on teams, so tie things into how it impacts the greater team, greater purpose. Leaders are equals. We talked about that already. One of the things, and I think this is helpful, this helps boomers all the time. So millennials are the first generation to call their parents their friends. So what that means is that when millennials were growing up, and say mom or dad got a job offer somewhere, their parents literally might say, you know, we can move to California or we can move to Georgia. Which would you rather do? And they actually took their kids' insights and desires into effect as they were processing their decision. And they might even make their decision based on what their kid preferred. Millennials didn't have to take hand-me-down beds from great-grandma. Millennials got to go to the store and pick out their bed. They got to paint their room whatever color they wanted. When my aunts, who were twins, were growing up, they're boomers, twins, they had one pair of roller skates. They had to share them. It's all they could afford. So what did they do? Obviously, they want all their kids to have their own pair of roller skates. But their experience was much different. So what we have to remember is when this stuff happens, our family dynamics, we bring those into the workplace. So the power distance has greatly decreased because I didn't have to, my parents wanted to know my opinion. They wanted to hear what I had to say. They valued what I had to say. So why wouldn't my boss, who actually looks like my parent, why wouldn't they? But you see, the boomers are going, I'm your boss. I make the decisions here. So part of the problem is they parented different than they acted in the office, right? And the work expectations are different than the family expectations. And so now you have these two cultures colliding. And again, we don't know how to navigate through it. Give them a voice. I just kind of touched on that. Two-way feedback. This is another thing. If there's one thing you can remember, take this one with you. This drives boomers and Gen Xers crazy. So they've already changed the way they do performance reviews, right? It's very rarely in most companies is it every year now. Often it's not even just every 6 months. They're giving feedback constantly because millennials really want that. That's a high value. That's well researched, right? But now when they actually pull you in for those more formal settings, they're giving you feedback and all of a sudden you're giving them feedback. And they're like, this isn't about me. And you're like, no, but I think you should know, you really offended this person or this just isn't working. And the boomer and the Gen Xer is like, are you kidding me? And the millennial just keeps going. And that causes all kinds of tension. And so if you can give them that space to offer you feedback, and if it's just, because again, this is how you were with your parents. That was normal at the dinner table. Well, how was your day at school? Well, how was your day at work? How are things going? How you feel about this? That was normal conversation. So it's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just the way it was, right? And so now, when a boomer or a Gen Xer is giving you a performance review and they don't ask you what you think of them, don't tell them. Wait until another time where it's more appropriate. Or go, and especially if it's a boomer, go up to them and say, I'd really like to tell you what you're doing well in the office right now. I've seen these things change, and it's incredible. And then after you have a few of those conversations, maybe start to bring up some of the things you'd like to see change. But if you've never built that bridge of the positive and what they're doing well, and you just go in there and you're telling them what they're doing wrong, to them that is completely disrespectful. But to you, that's just normal conversation. But you have to understand the world that you're swimming in. Don't dictate, negotiate. Most millennials will say, yes, don't tell me what to do. Help me decide that that's what I want to do. Okay, that is great and wonderful, but that does not always work in a perfect world. So while I coach boomers and Gen Xers, I say this is very important. And sometimes it's worth the extra 10 minutes it takes to talk to your millennial employees and say, well, how do you feel about this? What do you think should happen? That can be worth its weight in gold down the road, a month, 2 months, to get this project to completion. But what I would say to millennials is sometimes when your boss says do this, just do it. Don't push back, don't fight them on it, just go do it. And if you really don't understand the why behind it, wait a little bit and say, you know, it felt like that was a really important thing for me to do, but I'm not really sure why I had to do it. Would you mind taking a minute to help me understand? And do it in a time when they have time to tell you. And as you guys get older, you'll understand that dynamic. Sometimes it just doesn't work that way. But when you're constantly asking for that, that feels really frustrating and, again, disrespectful. Gen Zers, real quick, just a few things so we know what's coming, because I think the world is drastically changing, and I think some of this stuff is really interesting. So Gen Zers, the most recent research out there is in the workplace, 84% of them prefer face-to-face communication. Now, most parents, Gen X parents with Gen Z kids will go, are you kidding me? They're on their phone all the time. When they come to work, they want to talk to you. They want to look you in the eye. They want to know that you're an honest, authentic human being that they can trust. Because they've learned from millennials that you can't trust Google. Not everything I learn online is true. So they want to be able to touch you, be in the same space with you, and know that you're real. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Gen Z is passionate about the planet. They really care about the planet. So if you're doing something well to steward the earth well, they'll love it. Phygital. Anything that's done in the physical world, they want it to translate to the digital world. So if they're reading a book, I want to immediately share my favorite quote. Okay? Before I click back to the next slide, this one is not to stir up any deep feelings. This is just so you understand where our culture is today. And being millennials, this will not shock you when I show this to a room full of boomers. They are gasping, okay? So on Facebook, there are 58 genders that you can customize your profile to. The reason I share this is because Gen Z wants to customize everything. If they can customize their gender in 58 ways, you better believe they want to customize their job description. So, real quick, how much time do I have? 10 minutes, okay. So, try to wrap it up. Culture. What is the culture you're in? How are you choosing to navigate it? Take a look at this. When I show that to boomers, they're like, I don't even understand that. What are they talking about? Okay? You're speaking a different language. You have to understand that. And don't just classify boomers as irrelevant. Your boomers and your Gen Xers, they are there for you. They want to see you succeed. Most boomers are in that place of life where they want to pour into the next generation. Pastor Harry, stand up. Pastor Harry is a pastor in North Chicago who is here today. I said, I know Pastor Harry. I'm like, what are you doing here? I was the last person I thought I would see. Okay? He said, because I care about young people, Katherine. He spent his Saturday here at a conference geared towards millennials because he wants to do this so well. Can you guys clap for him? There are people who care about you so deeply and want you to succeed. Don't write them off because they have gray hair. They may not be the most technologically savvy person on the planet, but their hearts are for you. So don't discredit them just because of technology. Experience versus knowledge. We've kind of talked about this. One of the biggest things that I think is hurtful to boomers and Gen Xers is that they feel discounted by millennials, that their experience means nothing. And part of that is stage of life, because as you get older, you understand the wealth of experience and how meaningful real experience is, because you've gotten your butt kicked more than a few times. But when you're your age, you're still idealistic, and you're still going to save the world, right? And that's okay. But have some wisdom and seek out those who've gone before you. And this is also the first time in history. Usually it's the older generations teaching the younger generation, so it's always been easy, right? I'm older than you, therefore I know more than you. Not anymore. You guys actually do know more about something that's the most powerful thing in the world than older generations know. And they are learning how to use it from you. So have a little mercy and grace on them, because they're trying to stay relevant, but this isn't intuitive to them. They didn't grow up thinking about this. They grew up with outhouses, without indoor plumbing. Have patience, have grace, and the relationships you can build will be priceless. Quick side note, women, when you go into the workplace, there are women there. Well, let me back up. We all have different theological perspectives on women in ministry. And I believe that this is a journey that everybody needs to go through on their own. It's a very personal thing. You need to wrestle with Scripture. Okay? And I hope that you each do that individually, and you don't just listen to what somebody else tells you. Women are in the workplace. They were hired to do a job just like you were. I hope that you can work well together. Technology is a tool, a very powerful tool, but relationships are what matter. Okay? We've had a lot of theological perspective. Really basic. We're made in the image of God. God is 3 in 1. God exists in relationship. We are not fully human. We are not fully in our image of God unless we are in relationship. So don't let this stop that from happening. Don't let this become the thing that protects you from having to have real conversations with people. Sometimes conversations hurt. Sometimes they're hard. Sometimes they're difficult. That's how we grow. Without those, if I were to take a poll, how many of you who've had your hardest conversations with some of your friends, those people turn out to be your closest friends through life? Why? Because you had those hard conversations, because you had that level and that depth of trust that continues on throughout a lifetime. But if you keep hiding behind this, you will never experience the richness of who you were created to be. Reflection. I think this goes in 2 directions. More and more research out there about millennials not taking time to reflect. If we don't stop and reflect on our own behavior and who we are and who God's encouraging us to become, we won't ever get there. I think this word is also powerful when it comes to sitting down, sit down with Pastor Harry. Let Pastor Harry reflect back to you what he's seen. Let someone else from another generation be your mirror. You will be profoundly impacted if you're able to sit there and hear how other people perceive you, what they're learning from you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But take time to receive what other people have to share with you. Then suspending assumptions. So imagine that it's your birthday and your spouse or your roommate, whoever it might be that you live with, says, "Oh, stay in bed, I'm gonna make you breakfast in bed." So in your head, you're imagining avocado, gluten-free toast, fresh organic fruit, smoked applewood bacon, freshly squeezed orange juice. And this is what arrives. And you see, my first response, this is a true story. My husband's here, by the way. I can't see him, but anyway, he's probably hiding right now. But so I could have sat there and said, "You know, babe, what is this? This is not what my stomach is ready to taste, or my tongue is ready to taste, right? It's not what I'm ready to fill my body with." And instead I said, "Wow, where'd you get that idea?" And he said, "You know, you've had a really hard 2 weeks, and I just wanted to make you smile." You see, I could have kept going and been disappointed and misconstrued his message, but instead, I was able to seek to understand, what are you trying to do here, right? It's not what I would do. It's not how I envisioned this morning. And I would have missed the gift of how he was trying to love me in a unique way at that point in time. And so I want to offer that to you as well when you navigate the workplace, especially as a Christian. How are you bringing together the body of Christ and understanding each person you come across as an individual, and not making assumptions that typically, if we're honest, are not very positive about other generations? It goes both ways. There's no generation who's innocent in this. We all do it. But how are we suspending those assumptions and really seeking to understand and embrace the full body of Christ without cutting off those who just don't get it the way we do? So thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for humoring me as I talk about millennials and Gen Z and learn more myself. And I really hope that each of us can take that posture of learning forward. So thank you so much.